poverty and alleviating poverty in Ghana, I think in the 80s and 90s, the way to go was to increase investment in agriculture because that's where the poorest people were, and that's where the majority of the population in Africa were employed. But we say better late than never. A few examples in Africa as to what can be achieved if the right interventions are put in place would suffice, and I think many have been given by His Excellency Kofi Annan and my colleague, the Prime Minister of Tanzania. Malawi has turned around in a few years from a net food importer to a net food exporter. In Senegal, rice is a staple food for the Senegalese people, and Senegal has seen a phenomenal increase in rice production with a policy of abundance being implemented by the government of President Abdoulaye Wade. Here in Ghana, barely 2 years of prioritization of agriculture has seen a surplus in maize production, allowing the World Food Programme for the first time in a decade to purchase surplus maize from Ghana for their humanitarian operations in the Sahel region. We have significantly reduced rice imports and increased our own local production of rice over the last year and a half. We currently are working on a medium-term agricultural development program and would launch major initiatives in agriculture by the end of the year. What are the interventions needed across the continent? Improved seeds, fertilizers, technology, training, access to land, marketing, appropriate transportation. And these represent the entire value chain. We have found examples here in Ghana where farmers have been using seeds over and over again, the same seeds over and over again for the last 20 years. Of course, this has reflected in a drop in productivity on their farms. We have an example of the Masara Arziki program being implemented by Wienco, where by providing fertilizers, improved seeds, training and extension to farmers and assisting them with marketing, productivity of a hectare of maize has gone up from 1.5 tons to 7 tons per hectare. I was speaking to a young man and asking him why he didn't join the Youth in Agriculture program. And I was surprised when he said, well, he's got the strength to farm and the land exists, but he will not farm because he doesn't have appropriate transport. If he farms all the food crops he grows, he and his wife would have to carry from the farm to the house. And so then you realize that transport is important. And just simple tripod, mopeds can assist them to carry their products from the farm to the market. We must look again at the issue of farmer cooperatives. We have implemented farmer cooperatives in Ghana with limited success. In many cases, people have given up and said, well, the Ghanaian was just not cut out for working together in cooperatives. But we need to bring farmers together, to unite them in order to strengthen their ability to produce. And so I believe we must look at farmers' cooperatives in this new effort for a green revolution in Africa. The need for green revolution in Africa has never been more urgent in view of the projection that the world's population will reach some 9 billion people by the year 2050, with some 1.8 billion of them living on the continent of Africa. This will happen at a time when the African environment could be adversely affected by climate change. It is sad to note that even though the African continent gives off less greenhouse gases than many other parts of the world, it happens to be the most threatened by climate change. A warming planet could shrink Africa's water resources and deplete Africa's agricultural production base by creating conditions that could produce famine and conflict. In my view, the establishment of a sustainable African green revolution now may be the answer to averting famine and conflict in the future. But how can such a revolution be started and sustained in Africa? Members of the diplomatic corps, ladies and gentlemen, in spite of the many international development agencies, consultants, and NGOs operating in Africa, African governments need to start from the critical premise that the continent's future prosperity is closely tied to the encouragement of commercial agriculture. I'm a proponent for commercial agriculture because the 1 billion people who go to bed hungry every night include as many as 300 million Africans, representing 30% of the global hungry, even though Africa represents only 14% of the global population. The fact that some major food exporting countries cut off exports to many of their traditional importers when threatened with insufficiency themselves should send a very clear signal to all of us that it pays to be self-sufficient and food secure. Africa should therefore not lose sight of this powerful message, because when it comes to the issue of food or hunger, there is no free trade anywhere in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, we can all recall the recent increases in global food prices, which more than doubled Africa's food import bill to over 15 billion in 2008. In Ghana, we were lucky because our farmers produced over 11 million tons of cassava. They produced over 5 million tons of yam, 1.7 million tons of cocoyam, and 3.3 million tons of plantain in 2008. Thus, Ghana was able to avoid severe hunger during this period. In addition, our cocoa farmers provided us with additional insurance by earning over $1.5 billion in cocoa export earnings between 2008 and 2009. While thanking the farmers and fishermen for their achievements so far, the message we have is that the fight against hunger and poverty in Africa is not yet over. We hope that in partnership with the private sector, AGRA, foreign direct investors, and our development partners, Africa can do much better by becoming the food basket of the world. Ladies and gentlemen, when we travel down memory lane in Ghana, we will recall that in 1985, overall economic growth in Ghana was subject to large fluctuations that were driven by worldwide annual variations in growth. These fluctuations were around an overall growth rate of less than 1%, leading to a per capita income growth rate of -2%. The consequence was a steady decline in per capita income and a steady increase in the percentage of the population under poverty. The good news, however, is that with better focus on agriculture, political stability, and better coordination with our development partners, the fluctuation in agricultural production has been radically reduced since 1985, and the growth rate of GDP has picked up to an average of 5% from the period between 1985 and 2008. From this strong base, the growth rate in both overall GDP and agriculture has been accelerating modestly in the last several years. For 2008, agricultural growth was 5.7% in Ghana, and overall GDP growth rate was 7%, leading to a 3.6% per capita GDP growth. In 2009, agriculture recorded 6.2% growth, and in the current year, we expect to exceed 7% growth in agriculture. Ghana does experience a rapid growth rate in agriculture, more typical of a middle-income country than a low-income country for the past decade. That high growth rate in agriculture has caused a radical decline in poverty from as high as 52% during the early 90s to roughly half that level at present. And this puts us on schedule as one of the African countries likely to meet ahead of schedule the Millennium Development Target of reducing poverty by half by 2015. It is in this context that the government of Ghana has rededicated itself to continue to work in partnership with AGRA, the private sector, foreign direct investors, and our development partners to substantially increase investments in agriculture in order to keep Africa insulated from future global food price shocks and be a source of food exports to the rest of the world. Ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, I believe a sustainable green revolution in Africa is attainable within our lifetimes, provided there is a major shift in our mindset from passive indifference to active involvement and collaboration between all stakeholders in creating this green revolution. I have no doubt that Africa will come through just as it came through earlier struggles it has been confronted with. I thank you all and wish to warmly welcome you once again to Ghana and ask God to bless you and bless Africa. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, Please welcome the President of the World Food Prize Foundation,